The letter was already folded when I found it. That was the first thing that felt wrong. Not the words. Not the signature. Not even the date. Just the fold. Precise. Clean. Centered like it had been measured. Mara never folded anything like that. She crumpled receipts into her coat pockets, left books open spine down on the table, tucked notes between pages instead of organizing them. Even her clothes, carefully chosen, always elegant, ended up draped over chairs by the end of the night like she trusted the world too much to stay in order. But this letter, it was disciplined, deliberate, and it was sitting on my desk. Not hers. Mine. I didn't touch it right away. I stood in the doorway of my office, still holding my keys, listening to the silence stretch across the apartment. It felt unfamiliar. Not empty, just rearranged, like the air had been moved somewhere else. Mara! I called. No answer. I stepped inside slowly, like I was entering someone else's space. The faint scent of her perfume lingered, but thinner than usual, like it was already fading. My eyes drifted back to the letter. I set my keys down beside it. They made a small, sharp sound against the wood, too loud in the quiet. Still, I didn't pick it up. Instead, I looked around. Her shoes were gone from the hallway rack. Not all of them, just the ones she wore often. Her coat was missing too. The black one she complained was too heavy but refused to replace. The rest of her things were still there. Her books, her scarf on the chair, the chipped mug she insisted was perfectly fine. It didn't look like someone leaving. It looked like someone pausing. That was the second thing that felt wrong. Finally, I reached for the letter. My name was written on the front. Not Luca. Not anything casual. Just for you. No emotion. No softness. I unfolded it carefully. And then I read, I'm sorry. This isn't something I can explain in a way that will make sense to you. I need to leave. Not temporarily. Not conditionally. Please don't look for me. This is the only decision I've made that feels entirely mine. Mara. I read it again. And then again. Each time slower. As if the meaning might shift if I gave it enough space. It didn't. It stayed exactly the same. Flat. Controlled. Final. But Mara wasn't flat. She wasn't controlled like this. She argued in spirals, felt things too deeply, said too much and then tried to take it back with laughter. Even when she tried to be distant, something always leaked through, some hesitation, some contradiction. This letter had none of that. It was clean. Too clean. I sat down without realizing I had moved. The chair creaked under me. My hand tightened slightly on the paper, just enough to leave a faint wrinkle along the edge. She left. The words sounded unfamiliar out loud, like I was repeating something I didn't believe. Because I didn't. Not like this. Not without. My gaze shifted again, scanning the room. No broken objects. No signs of an argument. No missing valuables. No urgency. Just absence. Carefully arranged. That's when something colder settled in. Not panic. Not yet. Something quieter. Doubt. By the time Matteo arrived, the letter was back on the desk exactly where I'd found it. Folded. Centered. I didn't tell him to come. He just knew. He always did. You're sure? He asked, standing near the doorway, his voice low, controlled. I leaned back in my chair, watching him. She's gone. His eyes moved briefly around the room, taking inventory the way he always did, noticing everything, but saying nothing about it. And this, he gestured toward the letter. Left for me. He didn't touch it. That was deliberate. Matteo respected boundaries, but only when he thought they mattered. And you believe it? The question hung there longer than it should have. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I said, it sounds like her. But even as I spoke, I knew it wasn't true. Not entirely. Matteo stepped further into the room. Does it? His tone didn't challenge me. It tested me. I looked at the letter again. At the sharp fold. At the spacing between the lines. At the way my name wasn't written, only implied. No, I said quietly. And that was the first honest thing I'd said since reading it. Matteo nodded once, like he had been waiting for that answer. Good! That word shouldn't have been comforting. But it was, in a strange, unsettling way. Why would she write this? I asked, more to myself than to him. Matteo didn't respond immediately. He walked over to the window, glanced outside, then back at me. She wouldn't, he said. Simple. Certain. I studied his face. looking for hesitation. There was none. You're sure? I don't deal in guesses. No. He didn't. That's why I trusted him. That's why everyone did. Even when they shouldn't. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the desk. Then someone wants me to believe she left. Mateo's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted, barely noticeable. If I hadn't been watching him closely, I might have missed it. And why would they want that? He asked. There it was. Not an answer. A redirection. I felt it immediately. The conversation bending, not breaking. Guided. Controlled. Like someone gently steering it away from something sharp. I don't know, I said slowly. And this time, I meant more than just the situation. Mateo studied me for a moment longer. Then he nodded again. Then we'll find out. We. The word settled strangely in the room. Not reassuring. Not threatening. Just present. I looked down at the letter once more. At the neat, careful handwriting. At the absence of everything that made it hers. This wasn't her choice, I said. It wasn't a question. Mateo didn't answer right away. He turned slightly, as if considering something beyond the walls of the room. And for the first time since he arrived, he hesitated. Just for a second. But it was enough. Because Mateo didn't hesitate. Ever. When he looked back at me, his expression was already composed again. Controlled. Neutral. We'll handle it, he said. Not, we'll find her. Not, we'll fix this. Just, we'll handle it. And suddenly, I wasn't sure if he meant helping me, or containing something I wasn't supposed to see. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed in the office, the letter in front of me, the silence pressing in from every corner. At some point, I unfolded it again. This time, I looked closer. Not at the words. At the paper. The edges were too sharp. The fold too perfect. And near the bottom, just beneath her name, there was something I hadn't noticed before. A faint indentation. Like something had been written there, and then removed. Carefully. Deliberately. I ran my fingers over it, feeling the shallow imprint. Not gone. Just hidden. My chest tightened slightly. Because Mara didn't hide things. She revealed them. Too much, too openly. But this was concealment. And that meant one thing. She hadn't written this to tell me the truth. She had written it, so someone else would believe the lie. I sat back slowly, the realization settling in like cold air through an open door. And for the first time since I walked into that room, I wasn't thinking about where Mara had gone. I was thinking about who needed her gone, and why they wanted me to stop looking. Across the room, my keys caught the light, still exactly where I had left them. Untouched. But suddenly, they didn't feel like mine anymore that I didn't leave the office until morning. Not because I was searching for answers, but because I didn't trust what waited outside that room. The letter stayed in front of me the entire night, unfolded now, its edges losing that unnatural sharpness as if time itself was trying to soften it into something believable. It didn't work. Every time I looked at it, the same thought returned, steady, insistent. This wasn't written for me. By sunrise, the apartment had shifted again. Light filled the spaces Mara used to occupy. It revealed details I hadn't noticed in the dark, small misalignments that didn't belong. The chair near the window was slightly angled. The bookshelf, one of the middle volumes, was pushed too far back. And on the kitchen counter, her mug had been moved. Not far. Just enough. Like someone had tried to recreate normal, but didn't understand what normal actually looked like. I stood in the doorway of the kitchen for a long time, staring at that mug. It was chipped on the rim. Mara always turned it so the chip faced inward when she drank, said it bothered her otherwise. Now the chip faced outward. Visible. Obvious. Wrong. I didn't touch it. Instead, I stepped back. Because the more I looked, the clearer it became. This wasn't absence. It was staging. Mateo returned before noon. He didn't knock. He never did. The building cameras, he said, as if continuing a conversation we hadn't finished. I remained by the kitchen doorway. And no sign of her leaving. The words landed exactly where I expected them to. Still, something tightened in my chest. And inside, he shook his head once. Disabled. For 2 hours. Of course they were. Not broken. Not malfunctioning. Disabled. Clean. Intentional. I walked back into the office slowly, Mateo following a few steps behind. Who has access? I asked. He didn't answer immediately, which in itself was an answer. I turned to face him. Matteo. Several people, he said finally. Security. Maintenance. Management. And you. It wasn't an accusation. Just a fact. He met my gaze evenly. Yes. Silence settled between us again. Thicker this time. More deliberate. I walked back to the desk and picked up the letter, holding it out slightly. This was placed here. Matteo glanced at it but didn't take it. I can see that. She didn't leave it. A pause. Then, you're certain? The question irritated me more than it should have, not because it doubted me, but because it echoed something else, something familiar. The kind of question that isn't meant to find truth, but to make you question it. I set the letter down carefully. Too carefully. You read it. Yes. Does it sound like her? Another pause. Longer this time. Matteo stepped closer to the desk, his fingers brushing the edge of the wood. People change under pressure. There it was. The first lie. Not obvious. Not dramatic. Just subtle enough to pass as reasonable. But wrong. Mara didn't change like that. She resisted pressure. Pushed back against it. Sometimes recklessly. Sometimes foolishly. But never quietly. Never cleanly. She wouldn't leave without telling me why, I said. Matteo's expression remained calm. You don't know that. I do. You think you do. The words were soft, measured, but they landed harder than anything he'd said before. Because they weren't about Mara. They were about me. About doubt. About uncertainty. A small, precise crack placed exactly where it could spread. I felt it. That shift. That subtle pull toward confusion. And for a moment, just a moment, I almost let it happen. Almost accepted the possibility that I had misread everything. That I didn't know her as well as I thought. That this letter, this absence, could be real. But then I remember the mug, the chair, the indentation beneath her name. And the doubt snapped. Cleanly. No, I said more firmly now. That's not what this is. Matteo studied me again. Longer this time. As if reassessing. Then what is it? He asked. I held his gaze. A story. He didn't react. But I saw it again, that flicker. That almost imperceptible shift. Someone wants me to believe she left, I continued. They arranged this. The letter. The apartment. The cameras. And why would they do that? He asked again. The same question. Repeated. Not curiosity. Pressure. I stepped closer to him now, closing the distance he had maintained since he arrived. You tell me. It wasn't aggressive, but it wasn't passive either. Matteo didn't move, didn't step back, didn't break eye contact. For a moment, we just stood there. Me waiting. Him deciding. Then, they want control, he said. The answer came too easily. Too prepared. Over what? He hesitated again. And this time it wasn't subtle. It was visible. A fracture in something usually seamless. You, he said finally. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was convenient. Why? Matteo's expression hardened slightly. Because you're not as careful as you think. There it was again. Another shift. Another redirection. Away from Mara. Back to me. To my supposed flaws. My blind spots. My mistakes. The pattern was becoming clearer now. Not just what was being said, but what wasn't. You're deflecting, I said quietly. I'm being realistic. No. I shook my head slightly. You're controlling the conversation. That landed. I saw it, even if it lasted less than a second. Matteo straightened, his posture tightening. I'm trying to help you. By telling me she changed? I asked. By suggesting I didn't know her? I'm telling you to consider all possibilities. No, I said again, softer now. You're telling me to doubt the only thing I'm sure of. Silence. Heavy. Unavoidable. For the first time since he walked in, Matteo looked away. Just briefly. Toward the window. Toward anything that wasn't me. And that was enough. Because Matteo didn't look away. Unless there was something he didn't want seen. When he turned back, his expression was composed again. But the shift had already happened. I had seen it. Felt it. Understood it. Then what do you want to do? He asked. The question sounded genuine. But now I knew better. Every question had a direction. Every answer had a purpose. And I was done following his. I want the truth, I said. And if the truth is that she left? It's not. You can't be sure of that. I stepped back slightly, creating space between us again. Not retreating, just repositioning. Yes, I said quietly. I can. Mateo exhaled slowly, as if conceding something. Then prove it. The words settled into the room like a challenge. Or a trap. Maybe both. I looked down at the letter again. At the faint indentation beneath her name. At the detail no one else had mentioned. No one else had noticed. Or pretended not to. I will, I said. And this time I didn't feel doubt. Just clarity. Because the lie wasn't just in the letter. It was in the room. In the silence. In the way the truth kept being redirected, reframed, rewritten. And Mateo, whether he realized it or not, was part of that lie. After he left, I didn't move for a long time. I just stood there, listening to the apartment settle around me. Then slowly, I reached for the letter again. Not to read it, but to feel it. To trace that hidden indentation once more. And this time I made a decision. Not about Mara. Not yet. But about the lie. I wouldn't confront it directly. Not now. Not openly. Because whoever created it, they were watching. Guiding. Adjusting. And if I pushed too soon, they would close whatever door Mara had tried to leave open. So instead, I would do the opposite. I would accept the lie, at least on the surface. I would let them believe it worked. That I believed it. That I was already beginning to doubt her. To doubt myself. And while they relaxed, while they stopped controlling every detail, I would start looking where they weren't watching. I folded the letter again. Not perfectly. Not like before. And placed it back on the desk. Slightly off-center. Just enough to break the illusion. Because the story they had written wasn't finished. And neither was I. By the third day, people had already decided what happened. That was the unsettling part. Not the speed, but the certainty. No one asked me questions anymore. They offered conclusions. Soft ones. Polished ones. Wrapped in concern that felt rehearsed. She probably needed space. Sometimes people leave without knowing how to explain it. You should focus on yourself for now. Each sentence carried the same quiet implication. She chose this. And somehow, I should understand. I didn't correct them. Not because I agreed, but because I had already decided I would let the lie breathe. Let it grow. Let it settle into something comfortable for everyone else. Because comfort makes people careless. And careless people stop hiding things properly. The first real shift came with the call. It was from the bank. Not unusual. Except for the tone. Too formal. Too precise. Mr. DeLuca, the woman said, her voice smooth in a way that felt practiced. We've noticed some recent changes regarding your joint accounts. I leaned back in the chair, the phone pressed lightly against my ear. Go on. A request was processed yesterday. Authorization appears to have been submitted under Ms. Mara Vance's credentials. My fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the desk. What kind of request? A brief pause. Separation of access. The words didn't hit immediately. They settled slowly. Like dust. You're saying she removed me? Yes, sir. No hesitation. No uncertainty. Just confirmation. I stared at the letter on my desk. At the folded edge. At the quiet lie sitting in plain sight. When was this approved? I asked. Yesterday morning. That didn't make sense. Mara was already gone. Or at least, that's what I was supposed to believe. Who approved it? I asked. Another pause. Longer this time. I'm afraid I can't disclose that information without further authorization. Of course not. I exhaled slowly. Was it done in person? Yes. That answer came too quickly. Too clean. Thank you, I said, and ended the call before she could say anything else. I didn't move for a while after that. Just sat there, letting the pieces rearrange themselves. Mara had left, but somehow she had also appeared at the bank. In person, filed a formal request, signed documents, separated accounts. Clean, efficient, controlled. It matched the letter. Too well. That was the problem. By afternoon, I was standing across from the bank manager. His office smelled faintly of polished wood and something sharper, citrus, maybe. Artificial. Everything about the room felt curated. Intentional. Like it had been designed to make people trust what they were being told. Mr. DeLuca, he said. offering a measured smile. I understand you have concerns. I didn't sit. I want to see the authorization. His smile didn't change. I'm afraid that won't be possible without. I'm not asking for a copy, I interrupted. I want to see it. A flicker. Small. But there. He adjusted his posture slightly. As I mentioned, there are protocols. She was here yesterday. He hesitated, and that hesitation told me more than his words ever would. Yes, he said finally. In person. Yes. I stepped closer to the desk. And you verified her identity. Of course. How? Another pause. This one heavier. More deliberate. Standard procedures, he said. Not an answer. A deflection. I nodded slowly as if accepting it. Then I said, describe her. That caught him off guard. Excuse me. You saw her, I said evenly. Describe her. His composure held, but just barely. She matched the identification provided. That's not what I asked. Silence stretched between us. Uncomfortable now. Less controlled. Finally, he said. She appeared calm. Calm. The word echoed in my mind. Wrong. Completely wrong. Mara wasn't calm under pressure. She paced. She questioned. She hesitated, even when she tried to hide it. She didn't ask any questions. I pressed. No. Didn't hesitate. No. Didn't argue. No. Each answer came quicker now, as if speed could replace accuracy. I nodded again. Slowly. Then it wasn't her. The words landed heavier than I expected. The manager's smile disappeared completely this time. I assure you, no, I said quietly. You don't. We stood there in silence, and for the first time, he looked uncertain. Not defensive, not dismissive, just unsure, because something about this didn't add up, even to him. I'll need to escalate this, he said finally. Of course he would. That was the safe response, the procedural response, the response that delayed everything without actually resolving anything. Do that, I said, and turned to leave. The hallway outside felt colder, or maybe it was just quieter, more honest. I walked past the reception desk without looking at anyone, because I didn't need to. I already knew what they would see. A man whose partner had left him. A man trying to understand something that didn't need understanding. A man being slowly removed from his own life. That was the pattern. Not just the letter. Not just the apartment. Now the bank. Piece by piece, access was being taken. Rewritten. Reassigned. And every time, it was done in her name. Clean. Legal. Undeniable. By the time I got back to the apartment, the silence felt different again. Not empty. Occupied. Not physically, but intentionally, like something had been left behind. Not an object. A presence. An awareness. I stepped inside slowly, let the door close behind me without a sound. Nothing had moved. Not visibly, but something felt tighter. More controlled, as if the space itself was holding its breath. I walked straight to the office, to the desk, to the letter. Still there, still folded, still wrong. But now, it wasn't the only lie. I sat down and opened it again. Carefully, deliberately, my fingers tracing that faint indentation once more. And this time I looked closer, not just at the mark, but at its shape, its spacing, the pressure behind it. It wasn't random. It wasn't accidental. It was writing. Hidden. Removed but not erased. I reached into the drawer and pulled out a pencil, then a blank sheet of paper. And slowly, carefully, I placed the blank sheet over the letter, and began to shade, lightly, evenly, letting the graphite catch on the invisible grooves beneath. For a moment, nothing. Then lines, faint at first, then clearer, letters forming, not complete, not perfect, but enough to read. My breath slowed, my focus narrowing, as the hidden message emerged, piece by piece, word by word, until finally I saw it. And everything inside me went still. Because beneath her signature, beneath the lie, Mara had left something else. Something they hadn't seen. Or hadn't understood. Not safe. I stared at the words for a long time. Long enough for them to lose meaning. Then regain it. Stronger. Sharper. More real. Not safe. Not confused. Not leaving. Not choosing. Not safe. I sat back slowly, the pencil still in my hand. And for the first time since this began, the truth wasn't abstract anymore. It wasn't a feeling or a suspicion. It was a message. Direct. Intentional. Meant for me. She hadn't left. She had warned me. And suddenly, the question wasn't where she was, or why she disappeared. It was who she had been afraid of, enough to hide the truth in a place only I would think to look. My gaze shifted toward the door, then to the windows, then back to the letter, and finally to the space Mateo had stood just hours before. Calm, controlled, certain, too certain. The realization didn't come all at once. It settled slowly, like everything else in the story. But when it did, it changed everything. Because if Mara wasn't safe, and someone had gone to this much effort to make me believe she left, then the danger wasn't outside. It was already inside. And I had just made the mistake of letting it think. I believed the lie that I didn't react. Not immediately. That was the first rule of survival. Don't let the truth change your behavior. I stared at the words "not safe" until they settled into something quieter, something I could carry without it showing on my face. Then I flipped the paper over, covered it, erased the evidence of what I had just uncovered. Not because I doubted it, but because someone else might see it. And if they did, the message wouldn't just disappear. It would be replaced, rewritten, like everything else. By the time Mateo returned that evening, the apartment looked exactly as it had before. The letter was folded, centered, the desk was clean, the silence was intact, and I was sitting where he expected me to be, waiting. He stepped inside without hesitation, his presence filling the room in that controlled, measured way of his. "How did the bank go?" he asked. I didn't look up right away. Just enough delay to feel natural. "Routine," I said. A lie, but not an obvious one. "Any issues?" I shook my head slightly, finally meeting his gaze. They confirmed what we already knew. That she left. I held his eyes for a second longer than necessary, then nodded. Yes. The word felt heavier than it should have, but I let it sit there, unchallenged, accepted. Mateo studied me for a moment, not searching for truth, but for inconsistency, for cracks. I gave him none. "Good," he said. The same word as before. But this time, it felt different. Colder. More final. I leaned back in the chair. "Access has been updated," I added. She removed me from the accounts. Mateo's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. Approval. Not relief. That was the difference. "You expected that?" I asked. He tilted his head slightly. "It makes sense." "No," I said quietly. "It makes it easier." A pause. Brief, but enough. "For her," he replied. I almost smiled, because the lie was getting thinner now, more fragile, and he didn't seem to realize it. That night, I changed my routine. Not drastically. That would be noticed. Just enough to create space, distance, control. I stopped using the main hallway. Used the secondary exit instead. I turned off the lights earlier than usual. Moved objects, not randomly but intentionally. Subtly. Small shifts that wouldn't matter to anyone who wasn't paying attention, but would reveal something if someone else was. The first confirmation came faster than I expected. The next morning, the chair near the window was back in its original position. Perfectly aligned. Exactly how it had been before I moved it. I hadn't told anyone, hadn't mentioned it, hadn't even acknowledged it out loud. And yet, it had been corrected. Not casually, not accidentally, deliberately. I stood there, looking at it, letting the realization settle fully this time. I wasn't alone in this apartment. Not when I was gone. Maybe not even when I was here. From that moment on, everything changed. But nothing looked different. That was the second rule of survival, appear unchanged. I stopped asking direct questions. Stopped pushing against the narrative. Instead, I leaned into it. Let conversations stay shallow. Predictable. Safe. When Mateo spoke, I listened. When he offered explanations, I accepted them. When he tested me, I passed. Because now I understood the pattern. It wasn't about convincing me. Not anymore. It was about monitoring me, adjusting based on my reactions, guiding the story as it unfolded. And if I stepped outside of that, if I showed I knew too much, the story would change. Again. By the fourth day, something else shifted. Not in the apartment, but outside it. I noticed it when I stepped into the lobby. The receptionist looked at me differently. Not with curiosity, not even with sympathy, but with recognition. As if she knew something, and wasn't sure if she was supposed to. "Good morning," she said, her tone slightly too careful. "Morning." I paused briefly at the desk. Not long enough to draw attention. Just enough. "Busy week?" I asked. A simple question. Neutral. "Safe." She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, sir." "Anyone new around?" Another hesitation. This one sharper. More noticeable. "Not that I'm aware of." A lie. Small, but clear. I gave a faint nod and moved on, because pressing further would only close the door. And right now I needed doors open. Back upstairs, I went straight to the office, closed the door behind me, and locked it, not because it would stop anyone, but because it would tell me if someone entered. Another small measure. Another quiet test. Then I sat down and unfolded the letter again. Not to read it, but to study it, to understand it beyond the words. The paper, the fold, the indentation, the hidden message, and something else, something I hadn't considered before. The timing. If the bank request had been made yesterday, and Mara had already been gone, then whoever submitted it didn't just have access. They had authority, enough to bypass verification, enough to make it look real. That narrowed things. Not completely, but enough to matter. My gaze shifted toward the door, toward the space Mateo always occupied when he entered. Calm, controlled, present, too present. I leaned back slowly, letting the pieces align. Not forcing them, just allowing them to settle where they naturally fit. Mateo had access. To the building. To the systems. To me. He had been the first to arrive. The first to question. The first to guide the narrative. And now, the first to benefit from it. Not financially. Not yet. But structurally. Positionally. He was becoming the only constant. The only reliable point in a situation designed to remove everything else. Including Mara. That realization didn't bring panic. It brought clarity. Because if Mateo was part of this, then the lie wasn't just external. It was personal. Carefully constructed. Specifically for me. I stood up and walked to the window. Looked out at the city below. Movement. Noise. Normalcy. All of it untouched by what was happening here. Or maybe, all of it hiding something similar. Behind me, the office remained still. Silent. Controlled. But now I understood the silence. It wasn't empty. It was listening. I turned back toward the desk. Toward the letter. Toward the message Mara had left behind. Not safe. She hadn't told me who. She hadn't told me how. But she had told me enough. Enough to survive. And now that's what this was. Not a search. Not yet. Survival. Quiet. Measured. Patient. Because the third rule of survival is knowing when you're being watched. And acting like you don't. That night, I didn't wait for Mateo to come. I left first. Without telling anyone. Without changing the pattern too much. Just enough to create a gap. A moment. Where I wasn't where I was expected to be. And as I stepped into the street, I realized something else. Something colder. Sharper. More dangerous. If they were watching me inside, then outside was the only place I might still be unseen. Or, the only place they expected me to run. The street didn't feel like freedom. It felt like exposure. Every step I took carried a weight I hadn't noticed before, as if movement itself had consequences now. I kept my pace steady. Not too fast. Not hesitant. Just normal. That was the performance. That was survival. I didn't go far. Just far enough to break pattern. Far enough to see if anything followed. The reflection in a shop window told me more than the street did. People moved behind me. Cars passed. Nothing obvious. Nothing immediate. But that didn't mean anything. Because whoever had done this, they didn't rely on obvious. I turned down a quieter street. Then another. Changed direction without making it look like I was changing direction. And still nothing. No footsteps adjusting. No shadows lingering. No second presence syncing with mine. If I was being watched out here, it wasn't close. Which meant one thing. They didn't need to follow me. Because they already knew where I would go. That thought stayed with me longer than it should have. Long enough to shape my next decision. I didn't go anywhere important. Didn't take risks. Didn't reach out. Instead, I went somewhere meaningless. A place that didn't matter, didn't connect, didn't reveal anything. And I stayed there long enough to become forgettable. When I returned to the apartment, it was early evening. The building looked the same, felt the same, but I didn't walk in immediately. I stood across the street for a moment, watching the entrance, waiting, not for someone to appear, but for something to feel wrong. Nothing did, and that was the problem. Inside, the lobby was quieter than usual. The receptionist looked up as I entered, that same careful expression, that same hesitation behind it. "Back already?" she asked. The words were casual, but the timing wasn't. "You expected me to be gone longer?" I replied. She blinked, just once, then smiled. "No, sir. Just making conversation." Of course she was. I nodded slightly and moved past her. Didn't stop, didn't push, because whatever she knew, she wasn't ready to say it. Not yet. Upstairs, the apartment greeted me with the same controlled silence. Nothing out of place, nothing obviously disturbed. But that didn't mean untouched. It just meant careful. I walked straight to the office. The door was still locked, exactly as I had left it. That didn't reassure me. It told me something else. If someone had entered, they didn't need the door. Inside, everything appeared unchanged. The desk, the chair, the letter, still slightly off-center, still imperfect, still mine, at least for now. I didn't sit. Instead, I moved slowly through the room, not searching, observing, letting my eyes catch what didn't belong. The bookshelf, the window, the floor near the desk. And then I saw it, small, almost invisible, near the edge of the rug, a mark, not a stain, not damage, pressure, like something had rested there briefly, recently, and been removed. I crouched down slightly, studying it. The shape wasn't clear, but the placement was directly aligned with where someone would stand if they were watching the desk, watching the letter. I straightened slowly. The room felt tighter now, less like a space, more like a point of observation. And suddenly, I wasn't sure if the office had ever been mine. That's when the second crack appeared. Not in the room. In the story. Mateo hadn't come back yet. That alone was unusual. He didn't miss patterns. Didn't allow gaps. If I left, he compensated. If I changed, he adjusted. But now, nothing. No call. No message. No presence. Which meant one of two things. Either he knew exactly where I had gone and didn't need to check, or he was occupied somewhere else, somewhere more important. I walked back to the desk slowly, picked up the letter, turned it over in my hands, then set it down again. This time, not where it had been. A few inches to the left. Another small shift. Another test. Then I left the office. Closed the door behind me. Didn't lock it. That was deliberate. I moved through the apartment casually, opened a drawer, turned on a light, poured water I didn't drink. Every action normal, unremarkable. But inside, everything was sharp, focused, watching. Time passed slowly, long enough to feel intentional, long enough to let something happen if it was going to. When the door finally opened, I didn't react immediately, just enough delay to feel real. Then I turned. Mateo stepped inside, his expression composed as always. "You went out," he said. Not a question. A statement. I nodded. Needed air. He watched me for a moment. Longer than usual. "You didn't say anything." "I didn't think I needed to." A pause. Then, "No," he said. "You didn't." Something in his tone shifted. Subtle. But there. Not control. Not entirely. Something closer to recalculation. "How was it?" he asked. "Quiet." Another pause. "Anywhere specific?" I shook my head. Just walked. He held my gaze. Measuring. Weighing. Looking for something. I gave him nothing. "Good," he said finally. But this time, the word didn't land the same. Because now, it wasn't approval. It was uncertainty. He moved past me, heading toward the office. And for the first time, I felt it. Not fear. Anticipation. Because the test was about to happen. I stayed where I was. Didn't follow. Didn't watch. Just listened. The door opened. A brief silence. Then a pause. Longer than it should have been. I closed my eyes slightly. Felt it. That shift. That moment. where something didn't match expectation. Then the door closed again. Footsteps returned. Measured. Controlled. But different. When Matteo stepped back into view, his expression was the same. Carefully neutral. But his eyes, they had changed. Just slightly. Just enough. You move things, he said. There it was. Not a question. Not confusion. Recognition. I met his gaze calmly. Did I? A beat. Then another. And for the first time since this began, Matteo didn't answer immediately. The silence between us stretched. Thin. Tight. On the edge of something neither of us had said yet. And in that silence, the lie cracked. Just a little more. Because now, he knew I was no longer following the story. And I knew he had been watching it all along. The only question left was, who would break it first? Matteo didn't press me. That was the first sign something had shifted. Before, he would have followed the question, tightened it, redirected it, turned it into something that revealed more than it should. Now he let it sit. You've had a long few days, he said instead, his tone even. It's normal to feel unsettled. Unsettled. The word was carefully chosen. Soft enough to sound empathetic. Vague enough to avoid meaning anything. I'm fine, I replied. He nodded once, as if accepting that. But his eyes lingered a fraction longer than necessary. Still measuring. Still adjusting. I'll handle the bank situation, he added. That caught my attention. Not because of what he said, but because of what it implied. Handle it how? Quietly. Of course. Always quietly. No need to escalate things, unnecessarily. I studied him for a moment. You mean no need to involve anyone else? A pause. Then, yes. There it was again. Control. Containment. Limitation. The story narrowing, closing in on itself. Maybe I want to involve someone else, I said. Matteo's expression didn't change, but something in his posture did. Subtle. Defensive. That could complicate things. For who? Another pause. Longer this time. For everyone, he said finally. I almost smiled. Because now, the cracks weren't just visible. They were widening. I'll think about it, I said, letting the conversation end there. Matteo nodded. Satisfied, or pretending to be. It was getting harder to tell the difference. He didn't stay long after that. Another change. Another deviation from pattern. Usually, he lingered. Watched. Maintained presence. Now he left. And for the first time since this began, I was alone. Truly alone. Or at least, as alone as I was going to get. I didn't move immediately. I waited. Counted the seconds in my head. Listened for anything. A door. A step. A shift in the silence. Nothing. Then slowly, I went to the office. The letter was still where I had moved it. Left. Uncorrected. Untouched. That told me something important. Whoever had been watching, they hadn't been here since I left earlier. Or, they had chosen not to fix it, which meant they were changing strategy. Adapting. I closed the door behind me. This time I locked it again. Then I went to the bookshelf. Not because I expected to find something obvious, but because of something that hadn't felt right before. That middle volume. The one pushed too far back. I reached for it slowly. Paused just before touching it. Listened. Nothing. Then I pulled it out. Behind it, there was space. Not empty. Hidden. A small compartment. Carefully cut into the back panel. Clean. Precise. Deliberate. My pulse slowed. Not faster. Slower. Because this was real. Not staged. Not part of their story. I reached inside. And felt it immediately. Cold. Metal. I pulled it out carefully. A key. Small. Unmarked. Except for one detail. A thin red thread tied around its base. Faded. But intentional. Mara. I stared at it for a long moment, turning it slightly in the light. The thread wasn't decorative. It was a marker. A signal. Something meant to be recognized. By me. Because Mara never used labels. She used patterns. Small things. Consistent things. Things only someone paying attention would notice. My grip tightened slightly around the key. Because this wasn't part of the lie. This was something she had hidden. Before. Before the letter. Before the disappearance. Before everything. I stepped back slowly, my mind already moving ahead. If she hid this, then she knew something. Planned something. prepared for something. And that meant she hadn't been caught off guard. Not completely. I placed the key on the desk next to the letter. 2 objects. 2 truths. One visible. One hidden. And then I noticed something else. Inside the compartment, there was a second item. Flat. Thin. Almost invisible against the back panel. I reached in again, carefully, and pulled it out. A photograph. Old. Worn at the edges. Not recent. I turned it over, and everything inside me went still. It was Mara, but not the Mara I knew. She was younger, her expression different, less guarded, less careful, and she wasn't alone. Standing beside her was Matteo, not as he was now, but unmistakably him. His hand rested lightly on her shoulder, not protective, not distant, familiar, too familiar. I stared at the image, my thoughts narrowing into something sharper, something colder. They knew each other. Before me, that wasn't something he had mentioned. Not once, not even indirectly, which meant it wasn't something he wanted me to know. I turned the photo slightly, examining the background. Nothing obvious, no clear location, no markings, just a moment captured, hidden, forgotten, or meant to be, but not by her, because she had kept it, hidden it, marked it, left it where I would find it. If I looked close enough, my gaze shifted back to the key, then to the photo, then to the letter. 3 pieces, 3 layers, 3 versions of the truth. And suddenly, the story changed again. Not completely, but enough. This wasn't just about someone taking Mara, or forcing her to leave. This was about something that existed before I was ever part of it. Something she hadn't told me, and something Matteo had made sure stayed hidden. I exhaled slowly, placing the photo back on the desk. Not in the open, not completely hidden, just present. Because now, I had something he didn't know I had. And that changed everything. I picked up the key again, turning it between my fingers, feeling the weight of it, the intention behind it. This wasn't just a clue. It was a direction. And for the first time since this began, I wasn't just reacting to the lie. I was moving toward the truth. But as I slipped the key into my pocket, one thought settled in, sharper than the rest. If Matteo and Mara had a past, and he had hidden it, then whatever she had been afraid of, it wasn't new. And neither was he.